First of all, we have Tammy Harwin, who's Consultant Director at Tammy Harwin Consulting. Very good name. Tammy's been involved in consultancy for a lot of apprenticeship standards, and currently is involved in the Level 6 degree apprenticeships and the Level 7 for financial services as well. And Tammy's going to give us some sort of background information on apprenticeships, what are the government forms, and the many opportunities that are available with those. Next then is Helen Stocks, and a number of you might have already met Helen. Helen is our apprenticeship guru at the Institute. Sadly, only for another 8 days, I think it is, because she'll be leaving to go elsewhere. But Helen will be talking about apprenticeships in financial services and where the Institute, what part we play, and how we can help you as well. And then we have from on the firm side, we have Adele Canera, Head of Resourcing, Financial Services and Future Talent at IFDS. So we'll start to hear the nuts and bolts of how to run an apprenticeship programme, what works, what doesn't work, and also the benefits of running an apprenticeship programme. So I think in financial services, that's still something that people are still trying to get to grips with. What am I going to get out of this programme if we run apprenticeships? And then an apprentice themselves, hearing straight from the horse's mouth. And I'm really pleased that Joseph Hall, who's an apprentice at Mercer, is going to tell us his experience. I think I've got it right that you just get into endpoint assessment, Joseph, pretty much. So great to have Joseph here because, you know, I've heard quite a lot of apprentices speak, and they're quite inspiring the way that they talk about working in financial services and how the programme has helped them. And then at the end, appropriately, Mandy Slaney, Industry Manager for Digital and Business at City and Guilds. And why I say appropriately, Mandy will be talking about the endpoint assessment, how they work, and also talk about recruiting for endpoint assessors as well. So without further ado, that's it from me. I will come back, and then once we get to the questions, we'll start to facilitate from there. So without further ado, I will hand over to Tammy.
Thank you, Richard. I think I'm tasked with giving you a bit of a potted history of how we got to where we are today, really. I'm conscious a lot of you will have heard of this lots of times, so I'm going to try and do a 30-second potted history of the apprenticeship reforms, just so that we're all kind of singing from the same hymn sheet, really. So apprenticeships have been around for, you know, many, many years, and actually have been historically a quality product, but there's been some humps in the road, I think it's true to say. And some years back now, Doug Richards did a review of apprenticeships, spoke to lots of employers, and they said, yeah, we like apprenticeships, they're pretty good, but actually sometimes we're not getting people that can do the job. And that ultimately was one of the key findings. They said we want more flexibility in them, and we want to make sure that these people can actually do the jobs that we've got within our organisation, rather than necessarily being sort of a group of qualifications bolted together to sort of enable someone to have the apprenticeship. So on the back of that, the new apprenticeship standards were formed, and the concept of a trailblazer, which is a group of employers who now design the apprenticeships that we're looking to deliver in the future. So we've now got this concept where a group of employers comes together and says, we need an apprenticeship in this area, there's a really good need driver here, we want this apprenticeship to be in this occupation. And they get together, they decide what that occupation looks like, they decide what the skills, knowledge, behaviours, competencies are that are needed for that job. And that's what the apprenticeships are now based on. So what that does, it gives you a much more occupationally specific apprenticeship that you can deliver in your business. Something that hopefully means that you've got someone at the end of it that can do the job for you, that can deliver for you, and is actually up to speed and working effectively for you more quickly. So that's the concept. Over the last 4 years since this has been going on, we've got about 300 standards now, 350 standards that are somewhere along the development process. About 5,000 standards have been delivered. I mean, you've got to put that in the context of the millions that have been delivered outside of that, but certainly we're getting there and it's starting to ramp up. And certainly the trailblazer groups that I've been involved with, although it's not always an easy process as an employer to be involved in developing apprenticeships and working with government, it's certainly a very sort of useful process, and they found it very engaging with, and it's been effective for them to do that. So, you know, they generally find it a positive experience. So all this is in the context of funding reform as well. So you have the apprenticeship standards that are being developed, and there's a lot of change around that. There's a lot of change for employers, a lot of change for training providers to try and make sure they're delivering what you need as employers. But you've got the context of the funding reforms that are happening as well. So Richard mentioned the apprenticeship levy. Some of you will be levy payers. It's all about putting the money in the hands of the employer. And that's true as well for non-levy payers. So some of you may not be levy payers. You may be those that are sort of 98% that fall outside of that bracket. And you're still going to be contributing towards the cost of your apprenticeships. Government will contribute 90% going forward, but you still need to make an investment of at least 10% in the apprenticeships that you're taking forward. So, you know, there's still an investment there to be made. For those of you that don't know, I'm hoping you do, apprenticeship levy, for those of you with a pay bill over £3 million, you'll be paying 0.5% of that pay bill into an account that you can only spend on apprenticeships in England. So that's the nuts and bolts of it, really. That's the crux of it. But really what we wanted to do today is try and sort of answer some of your questions about how you can do that a bit more effectively. I'll hand over to Helen to talk a little bit more about what some of those apprenticeships in your field look like. And then we can perhaps come back to some more detailed questions around the standards and the funding if we need to later. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy. So as Richard mentioned earlier, I've been managing apprenticeships here at the CISI probably for about the last 3.5, 4 years. And the CISI have been really actively involved in the development of apprenticeships in financial services. We've been working with those employer groups that Tammy alluded to, who are all, sector specific, creating these sector-specific financial services apprenticeships. Of those 300 that Tammy mentioned about being in development, there's about 100 apprenticeship programs at the moment which are suitable and would fit across a financial services organisation, and that's including things like HR, marketing and IT. And then more specifically to the sector, there's about 20, just over 20 that are financial services specific apprenticeships that have been developed. And 9 of those actually have CISI qualifications embedded in them. You should all have a copy of our employer guide on your seat, and on the back page of that it does actually go into more detail of which of our qualifications are available as part of which financial services apprenticeship, and it includes in areas like investment operations, compliance and risk, power planning and financial advice. These apprenticeships, they really do provide you a great opportunity to develop and train your staff and bring them up to a high level. But the one thing to note is it's not all about just getting your apprentices through a professional qualification. It's actually about training them to have all of the relevant skills and behaviours that are also essential to be a valued employee. And the apprentice will actually help the apprenticeships will help your apprentice to basically contextualise all their learning from the professional qualifications, so they can actually demonstrate that and become, a really, really valued member of your staff. So the CISI, like I said, we've been involved in the employer groups. We've been working really closely developing them, but we're also now actually going out to members, and I know there's a few people here that we've already spoken to, just trying to provide some advice, support and guidance. A couple of the guys in the team are already here today as well. So if you are looking for some of that additional support to see, we can help provide you with information on, how to choose a training provider, what sort of thing you should be looking for in your apprentice, then that's the sort of thing that the Institute can help you with. And I'll pass on to our experienced apprentice provider.
Thank you. So as Richard said, I'm Adele Carnera. I'm the head of resourcing for financial services and future talent at IFDS. For those of you that don't know IFDS, we're the outsourced provider within the investment industry. So some of the back office services will be outsourced to us. We've got about 5,000 employees, and we started our apprentice journey in earnest back in about 2012 when we looked at our resourcing pattern for our entry-level positions and the roles that those individuals were undertaking. And we looked, coincidentally, that was when the first real framework for investment operations was launched, and that provided us with more of a structured approach to learning and developing skills for all of those administrative roles. They incorporated professional qualifications, so the IOC, and that allowed us to give all of our entry-level employees a much more structured approach to their first job, more or less, in investments. To date, we've had just around about 850 apprentices, so that's quite a big commitment from us. It has been a success. There were some challenges along the way, most of them associated with the volume and the scale of what we were trying to achieve. We've learnt lots, and in the new levy world, that's put us in a really strong position post-levy to look at how we're going to approach. We are levy payers, so how we're going to approach using our levy pot. So hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions a bit later as to how we're going to do that. As Helen mentioned, one of the key things for us was not just to look at the investment operations and supporting functions, apprenticeships. It was to look at central services, human resources, compliance, and look at frameworks that were appropriate for all areas of our business, not just our core activity. We were part of the Trailblazer Group for investment operations, so we've all sat in rooms for hours and hours and hours, getting into the detail of the skills and knowledge and behaviours for those new standards, and also the assessment piece. So now I'll pass you over to Joseph and we'll talk to you about what it's like.
Just kindly, Richard introduced me. My name is Joseph Hall. I'm from Mercer, if any of you are aware of Mercer. I joined Mercer in 2015, October, as one of the investment apprentices there now. I didn't join post-school. I studied for 2 years after school, business and nutrition, did accounting for a year, didn't enjoy it. Wanted to get into the investment world and thought it was the apprenticeship was a great way of kind of getting into that and getting on the corporate ladder without actually going to university and getting the degree and the debt, blah, blah, blah. So I guess my role here is to answer any of your questions that you might have about how the apprentices find the role, how they fit into the company, how we're kind of valued. So at Mercer, I didn't feel like coming into Mercer as an apprentice. I didn't feel like an apprentice. I just felt like a new analyst. So I guess I'll keep my part short. If you have any questions on my experience or how I found it, or like the things I enjoy about the apprenticeship, then I'm here to answer any of your questions. And like I said, I'll keep my part relatively short, and Mandy to wrap up on that.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Mandy Slaney. I'm the industry manager for City & Guilds, and I currently look after business and digital standards, including finance, where there's been quite a lot of activity across standards that have been launched. There seems to be new ones every day. City & Guilds is an approved endpoint assessment organisation for a number of standards, and they, as I say, keep growing every day. We have been heavily involved with the financial services of a number of the standards there, and very much, like Adele said, is a key part of that has been working with the employer groups and the providers. So it's really how can we take it to the next step, and what sort of guidance and support do we need to work together to put in place. And that has been a lot of, you know, people in a room, closed doors for what seems like, you know, quite a long time. However, now behind the scenes there's lots happening. In preparation, we have got learners coming through for endpoint assessment on a number of standards. We have actually undertaken some endpoint assessments already for a different standard, which everything went really well on that. But as I say, everything's very new, and I think it's a challenge, a new journey for everybody. So hopefully I can answer questions today. I also have a colleague, Jamie Holland, who is the endpoint assessment manager, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. So I can always take things back to him on anything I can't answer. What I would say is we are recruiting at the moment. We have been for quite a long time now, recruiting and training on various standards, and they've been sort of prioritised depending on which ones, you know, where we've got learners coming through. That has been quite successful. We've had some really good applicants. One of the key things that we want to ensure is that we've got some current, up-to-date assessors that are actually, they have got industry experience. So that's, we have quite tight criteria for that to make sure we get the right balance of people coming through. So if anybody's interested in sort of pursuing that, please grab me today, and I've also got some details of how you can apply.
If I just pose maybe 2 or 3 questions, and we'll start with those, and then we'll come to the audience. Maybe Adele, first one for you. You mentioned, you've learned a lot, what has worked, what hasn't worked. I'm sure people would love to know, maybe what should firms avoid? What are the things that you've learned you think, right, if I ever was to speak to anybody, that's one nugget that you should take away with you not to do, because that caused us the biggest headache. So let me get you to think about that. Maybe Tammy, because there may be some non-levy payers, maybe you could just touch on how a non-levy payer sort of gets access to the funding. And then thirdly for Joseph for now, I'm sure there'll be questions for Helen and Mandy later, but maybe good things, bad things of being on an apprenticeship programme. I'm sure everyone would be really interested to, because of course everyone wants to avoid those pitfalls, what shouldn't I be making our apprentice doing? So maybe you can have a think about what's been good and what's been bad on your programme. Hopefully no one's going to be taking notes from Mercer later. So maybe Adele, for you, sort of what should firms avoid?
I think the key thing to avoid is perceiving an apprenticeship programme as some kind of CSR activity or something additional to your normal business activity. Through discussions, through the Trailblazer groups and other forums, the key thing for us was that we integrated the apprenticeship into our normal business activity. The apprentices do a job for 80% of their working week, the other 20% they're learning, which I'm sure someone's going to ask me about later. And they perform a function, they have deliverables, they meet objectives, and they're a core part of our employee population. Over and above any kind of FTE modelling or anything like that, they are employees and perform key activity. That engages the apprentices. They're delivering and contributing as much as their colleagues. It's also helped to increase stakeholder engagement. So obviously for operational managers, the first reaction I got at the beginning was, oh, that's going to be lots more work and there's going to be a lot more commitment from the management teams. It is. There's no getting around that. There is an additional activity. However, if the apprentice contribution is clear and measured and not underestimated, one of the key surprises has been how effective the apprentices have been, particularly in a knowledge capacity. That there was a concern that maybe 3 IOC papers was too much for those without experience in the industry. That's not proved the case at all. So they've been a really positive addition to the business.
And so you pick up an important point that there's got to be an end job for these apprentices. So you can't say, well, let's have 10 apprenticeships and we'll pick the best 2 or 3. There has to be a job at the beginning for the end of that apprenticeship programme. So that's an important piece to take away from that. Tammy, maybe the funding for non-levy payers.
I mean, first of all, just echo what Adele said as well on that piece about, it's not just about, you need to make sure the apprenticeship programme that you're putting in place has a business place, it has a reason for you, it has a driver in the business, and that the business is committed to it. Otherwise, it will fall over, it'll end up being a little niche thing that's running in a department somewhere, rather than it being something that actually works for you. When I've worked with a lot of employees, it's about getting that top-level strategic buy-in to your programme before you actually start delivering to it. Make sure it's something that's worthwhile. It's not just about spending your levy money. Yeah, sure, that's a driver, but unless it's actually something that you can see a benefit from and will actually work and give you competent people, there's not a lot of point, because actually there is a lot of things in terms of your commitment and time that you put into an apprentice and to developing those like you would any other employee, over and above the money that you pay towards it out of your levy pot or your non-levy pot. So yeah, just echoing what Adele said. But yes, on the funding point. So everyone talks about the levy because it's been such big news, and it is a massive change. But actually, you know, I think the stats are 98% of employers are not levy payers. It's only a small percentage that are actually in that scope. So for non-levy payers, in some ways things haven't moved that much actually in terms of how things work. So you still need to find yourself a good training provider, and that might be something we touch on later. You know, you need to find somebody that can deliver the training and the apprenticeship that you want to have. And they will actually ensure that you can get hold of the apprenticeship funding that you need. So they'll have a contract with government, with the Skills Funding Agency, which means they can fund the apprenticeship that you are wanting to deliver. As a non-levy payer, you will contribute 10% of the total cost of that apprenticeship. And that might not be 10% up front, usually it's sort of over the life of the apprentice. So it's still a significant commitment, but also what an opportunity. I mean, if we're talking about some of the degree apprenticeships that we've got, and higher level apprenticeships that are available to employers and to apprentices now, you know, for actually quite a small contribution, you're going to be able to deliver degree apprenticeships and that sort of progression pathway for your new and existing staff. So, you know, it does provide a really good opportunity, and the new standards, because they're more occupationally specific, you know, really do sort of help with that actually. So yeah, things haven't moved actually. It's about finding the right training partner, and there's government funding that's going to be available to you. And you have to make that 10% contribution. There are other incentives in there as well. I don't want to get into loads of detail, but if you're taking on a 16 to 18-year-old apprentice, you get your national insurance for free, basically. You don't have to pay those contributions. If you're a very small employer taking on a 16 to 18-year-old, so you've got less than 50 staff, you don't even pay the 10% contribution, because government want to really encourage those employers and support those employers to take on apprentices. So there's lots there actually. For you to sort of pick up and run with. That cover it?
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions on the levy that we'll explore a bit more on shortly. Joseph, so good, bad things have been on an apprenticeship.
Good, bad and the ugly.
Yeah, exactly.
So before you guys think I've been wheeled in here to shine the light on apprenticeships, I haven't. I've been at Mercer a year and a half, so I've got quite a good view on the good points, the bad points and the ugly points. Now I can tell you there are no ugly points that I've experienced today on the apprenticeship scheme. I've successfully completed the IOC, which is 3 exams now throughout my exam period, 3 exams that I took. I got great support from my training provider, great support from my employees, great support from my colleagues. So overall, throughout the whole process of studying, managing kind of the work-life balance, it's been great. Now in hindsight, the bad thing that I would have said is, because I am now the guinea pig on the Trailblazer, it's been quite a prolonged kind of timeline, but again in hindsight it's because I passed my exams a bit too quickly, so I've kind of been sat in limbo for the endpoint assessor to sign off kind of level 3. So good points, lots of them. Bad point, I'm the guinea pig for Trailblazer, which none of you guys will experience because it will all be in place by the time you guys get your apprentices.
That's great to hear. No bad points. The bad point is going to be a good point shortly, because we've got the endpoint assessment all sorted. Now, open to you. Who would like to pose a question? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Lawrence Basker. I'm Intermediaries Manager for the National Apprenticeship Service. So my question is primarily aimed at you, Helen. How already and aware would you say the sector is in terms of apprenticeships, in terms of the levy and apprenticeships in general? What campaign activities might you be looking to do on that agenda, and would you welcome a direct partnership with the National Apprenticeship Service?
I'm sure we would, very much so. I'm sure Richard as well, you'd be very happy for us to work with National Apprenticeship
We'll take you up on that offer straight away.
But yeah, I think in general, the industry seems to be relatively well aware. I mean, we are still receiving, you know, at the moment, my colleagues and I were going out to speak to all of our member firms to make sure they're fully aware of everything that's going on, that they're aware of the levy. You know, every so often we're still getting a few comments about people who say, oh, we're not interested in apprenticeships, we don't want to pay the levy. We do have to turn around and say, tough. There are no exemptions, obviously you have to pay the levy. But in general, the industry seems to be aware of it. It seems like everyone's starting to, you know, dip their toes in the water of apprenticeships at the moment. I don't think we're going to see mass expansion immediately. And obviously, like Joseph said, you know, this first round of apprenticeships have all been guinea pigs, so we're now going to be moving on kind of past that stage. So with all of our ducks in a row, with the endpoint assessments all completed and, you know, and ready for use, which I'm sure you'll be booked in the next couple of weeks for yours. But yeah, I think, you know, we've been doing some campaigns to our own members, but like I said, I'm sure we'll be very welcome to work together on this, because there's not that much external advertisements to the outside world about what financial services are doing. I know that I do find it quite frustrating when I see advertisements for apprenticeships and they're all for builders and plumbers, and occasionally we'll see the odd accountancy one, but it really doesn't reflect the level of investment that the financial services sector has actually given into this.
Yeah, I think it's actually probably unusually, given the financial services sector buy into apprenticeships in the past. It's unusual actually if you look at the Trailblazer activity and the development of the standards, you're actually ahead of the game of some. So actually you've been very proactive in terms of developing the standards. So you've actually now got a really good breadth and depth of apprenticeships for you to buy in. So you're not behind the game in terms of actually having some products to work with, if you like. So I think it's a lot about awareness raising and sort of understanding the practicalities of apprenticeships, really. Yeah.
I think more campaigns can be done, greater awareness, particularly with training providers, ourselves, yourselves, will only improve things, because, of course, some of the bigger firms have had apprenticeship schemes for a number of years, but it's probably the sort of the medium to smaller size firms that also don't have someone purely just to look after apprenticeships. So firms are battling with where does it sit? Does that sit in HR? Does that sit in compliance, learning and development? Those are sort of the questions some of the firms are battling with. And that's where, by speaking with us and training providers and others, we can sort of talk to them about how others can help them deliver a programme that suits their needs. So there's definitely a lot more can be done on this. Yes, madam.
Can I ask Joseph a question and also Adele? So I suppose, how did you end up at Mercer? What was the recruitment process like? How did you decide to apply to them? And then Adele, how do you recruit? I know you've taken on a lot of apprentices. What's your selection process? And how do people find you?
So,
Yeah.
me first. So how I got into industry, how I got into Mercer. So I did accounting previously and decided that investments was kind of the thing that I wanted to get into. Now I proactively kind of searched for the job. It was a small link at the bottom of the Mercer homepage where you apply, you go through kind of a written interview, a telephone interview, a face-to-face interview, an exam, and then a formal interview. So it was quite a long-winded process, but for me, the way I got in, it was just kind of, it was what I wanted to do, so I kind of proactively went out there and searched it. So I think they're more advertised now than they were in 2015. So I think they're easier to come by now if you're not.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if there was a specific portal that you went on and it showed a list of companies that are offering apprenticeships, and that's how you found them. But maybe that.
I think there are places like that which show job the companies.
Yeah.
But the way I found it was basically I knew Mercer, so I kind of went through them directly as opposed to kind of a pool of jobs.
I mean, there are specific websites, National Apprenticeship Service, government sites. There are agencies and job sites specifically for apprentices now. And also we've probably upped our social media activity to make it relevant to audience. Yeah. Obviously there's no age discrimination, but the bulk of applicants come from a particular age profile. And we use Facebook a bit more. We're looking at Snapchat at the moment. Quite sure. But in terms of the recruitment process itself, it was really, really, really important from a stakeholder perspective that we weren't seen to be dumbing down anything. So we actually didn't change the selection process. It's a bit more robust, and we have looked at activities around interaction, communication, more of the soft skills. Emotional maturity, emotional intelligence, so there are group activities as well as online assessments and interviews. So the normal activity. It was really important for the business to understand that we weren't trying to dumb down or lower our entry requirements at all. We didn't, so our education requirements remain the same, and that was really important.
Did you do the selection process just yourselves, or did you involve training providers? Or?
We do ours ourselves.
Right.
Most large training providers, A, have a resourcing team that will help you source candidates, and B, very much also have a team that can help you look at different assessment exercises that may be appropriate. But most of the larger training providers will have a resourcing arm that can help you source candidates.
I think also one of the messages that we all need to keep on reminding firms is that this levy can be used for existing staff as well. So it's not just new entrants to the markets. So that probably isn't a message that has got completely across yet. So, you know, when you are looking at apprenticeships, look at the staff you've already got that you might want to sort of move on to the next level.
I think the way people view apprenticeships are school leavers. Now, personally, I'm not an advocate of it's not. I joined at 19, so I'd studied 3 years outside of school, so I didn't come from a school leaver. It was an avenue of how I can get my foot into kind of that industry. So I think apprenticeship shouldn't be viewed as 16-year-old leaving school, doesn't know what to do, wants to join an apprenticeship. I think it can be for anybody, really.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do agree with existing staff. Obviously, to qualify to enter an apprenticeship standard, you need to be new to role, or your role needs to be fundamentally different. So you can't put everyone through an apprenticeship. But I do think the packaging and the communication and the labelling of any kind of learning framework should be considered. And yeah, there is a perception that apprenticeships are for school leavers, and if in your own organisation it's more appropriate to rebrand it, then absolutely.
Yeah, again, I think there's a lot of work to be done on that in financial services. But as Adele said, you don't have to call it an apprenticeship programme. Although some of the firms are saying don't be frightened of calling it an apprenticeship programme either, because there's nothing wrong with it. It's still relatively new to a lot of firms.
I think a lot of firms do rebrand them, but actually as a big apprenticeship advocate, unless we keep calling it apprenticeships and you know, promoting those as a quality product, it's never going to change in people's mindsets, are they? So.
And I think it has changed. I mean, as I say, I started our apprenticeship journey in earnest in 2012, and particularly in financial services, it wasn't really a thing. So when I was, you know, talking about apprenticeship, everyone was looking at me very confused. And it was really difficult to engage or to promote an investment-specific apprenticeship, because it seemed like a contradiction in terms at that time. Now, only 4 or 5 years later, it's completely different. So, and we didn't shy away from using the term apprentice, we did. And now we've had, you know, I'm approached by parents or employees on a daily basis saying, I think my child would like to do an apprenticeship rather than go to university. That would never have happened, or didn't happen, you know, 5 or 6 years ago. So perception has already changed. The funding rules are now state that an apprentice needs to be working for 80% of the time and away from desk learning for 20% of the time. You will, as a regulated industry, most of us in the room will have employees that already spend some percentage of their week, month, year away from their desk completing mandatory competencies, inductions, all kinds of other development activity. And the key to managing that kind of expectation is to look really honestly at your own company, what activities already exist, what will qualify as away from desk activities already, because we're in a regulated industry, so it's nigh on impossible that anyone doesn't do that already. And I think you'll probably find that with, you know, mandatory regulatory activity and normal development activity, that will account for a chunk of that time. But it's about looking at your own organisation and what actually happens already, and then working out what you need to do from there. But yes, learning does need to be within working hours.
But also their studies and everything towards the IOC, all of that can also contribute towards that as well. So when you bunch it all together, it makes that 20% off the job learning. You know,
to set an hour aside.
No, not necessarily. No, and each organisation manages it differently. You know, some will send their apprentices off out of the office with their training provider or to a college or something for a day a week, whereas others will, you know, they'll manage it by saying, well, you'll be in the office this day, but you'll be in a meeting room doing X, Y, Z, or for 2 hours, you know, an hour and a half a day. As long as the apprentice and you, the employer, are actually monitoring this and keeping note of it, and you can actually demonstrate at the end of the apprenticeship that they have actually spent that amount of time, you know, doing this off-the-job learning, then it should be fine.
It's going to, in the new standards, it's an audit point, so it will need to be logged like CPD. So, and that's, yeah.
I think documenting it is the key part.
And your training
as
provider
well.
will support that, because it's fundamentally something they need to do to ensure the quality of their apprenticeship. So they're going to support you with that element too. But as Adele says, you want to make sure it's suited to your work and what you already do.
What sort of, you might not have known what was classed as off the job training.
What sort
of off the job training did you do, Joseph?
So when I studied for IOC, I got given the option to study half a day each week. So I'd take one afternoon off, whether I went home, whether I stayed in the office, whether I went to wherever I wanted to go, I could go and study if I wanted to study that day. So the way it worked for me, I think it was about 10% a week of my working hours spent studying for IOC. Now I think you get a bank of study days. So I think if you keep failing, then they can't just keep giving you half a day study each week. You'd have to do it in your kind of own time. But the way it worked for me, we have our own kind of training, kind of job training outside of the apprenticeship. So I think it was probably about 20% if you kind of chunk it all together. I think for me, I spent about half a day a week. Training, yeah, so my training provider provided loads of material, loads of recordings, loads of books, questions, so that's what I did half a day a week.
Most of the training material will be online now, so some of our apprentices, they've kind of grouped themselves into little study groups, and they'll go off for 2 hours on a Thursday, you know, and sit in a meeting room and discuss and do practice questions and stuff together. And the same with the other elements of their apprenticeship. It's not, they don't go away and sit by themselves. It's a mixture of activity. Yeah. And as Helen said, it's key that you understand that it suits your organisation. And in your discussions with the training provider, it's really important to give them as much information about your organisation and how it already works, so they can work with you at coming up with the best solution, rather than, as has happened, you know, some training providers will come with this is how we can do it. Everyone says yes, okay, and then, you know, 6 months down the line it's not actually integrating with business activity, and then it's difficult for managers to manage and apprentices to fit everything in. So it's key that discussion happens at the beginning, so that it does, you know, fully integrate with operational activity.
Just quickly, how much interaction did you have with your manager during that time?
So my manager at work, in terms of the apprenticeship side or just job stuff? The apprenticeship side.
Both related, isn't it?
So I guess the input that my manager had on the apprenticeship side, I had a training provider, and a guy came to meet me once a month. Now that meeting consisted of my training provider kind of mentor me and my manager, so not only could the training provider track where I'm up to, it was kind of to see how happy my manager was with my progression, behaviour, how I was getting on, and kind of all that stuff. So it was kind of once a month, kind of an hour or so input into the apprenticeship, and it was kind of day-to-day stuff, because I work quite closely with my manager at work in kind of the day-to-day role, so I quite have a lot of interaction kind of on a daily basis in that respect.
I think the 20% off the job training is the one that sort of we get most questions about, I think, isn't it, Helen, when we're going out to see the firms, but just don't be frightened of it, you know.
We work with a range of schools and colleges across the UK who actually offer our qualifications to A-level students. So they're a really key area that we actually will promote apprenticeships to, and a number of firms, if they've got any vacancies for apprenticeships, we will actually promote them directly to those students. Quite a number of those would come out of their A-levels with the Introduction to Securities and Investment qualifications. They've already done the first module of the IOC. They've already, they can already demonstrate that they're interested in working in the sector, and they've got some sort of background knowledge. So we will, liaise with them and advertise with them and their actual schools as well directly. Outside of that, we do attend, large conferences, things like the Skills Show, the huge big skills conferences across the UK. We do attend those and promote in that respect. But it's because we don't actually physically, the CISI don't physically have those vacancies. It's a bit of a
employers need to do something.
Yeah, it's more.
Not social. I don't really use social media, but could you not use your website as an apprenticeship where it shows the businesses that offer apprenticeships, so that people can say, oh, CSI, go and have a look. So you might be in Leicestershire, but your school isn't signed up, but they want to meet someone on the train who says, oh, look at this. They could go and look, find out which businesses offer, and then approach from that direction.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more that we can do.
Educational establishment.
I think there's plenty more to be done with the schools, and because when we speak to the schools, it's quite low down on their radar actually, as an alternative to maybe going to universities. And what we're finding the key is speaking to the parents to make them aware, because of course they're going to be the ones who are going to be guiding their children as well. So there's a lot more to be done, particularly with careers advisors in schools. The lack of knowledge is huge there. So maybe there's another campaign to be
done. There's actually the Apprenticeship Schools campaign program that we're funding. What we can do is, if you want your sector qualification noted, I can pass them into the introductions, and they can include that in their talks when they go around.
Okay.
Brilliant.
I think you're absolutely right, though. I think trying to increase diversity and social mobility and all that kind of stuff is a really key point around apprenticeships, as well as it being for existing staff. So, once you've got a programme that's successful in your business, it's really good for employers to actually do some of that outreach to try and drive different talent into your business. And there are other things. I know you've got there's lots of employability programmes that employers and things could tap into. There's more formal programmes like traineeships, which is a government-funded basically work experience programme for those with not that much job experience. And you as employers can it's a bit of a try before you buy for both the prospective employee and for you. And that can be a really good pipeline into apprenticeships for you to find the right people and to help you recruit them. And again, training providers can help with some of that stuff as well. But I think you're right, it's an interesting way of getting new people into the industry, into the city, isn't it?
I'm, before I ask anyone for another question, conscious Mandy's sitting on the end there and got away scot-free so far. Maybe, Mandy, maybe you could just explain a little bit more about endpoint assessment and what that actually is.
Yeah. Well, it's quite complex if anybody has looked to the standards, because every single standard is very different on the endpoint assessment. So I think a different approach, we've had to certainly take a different approach for each individual standard, and what's involved, what's the process from end to end. I think the key thing for us as an independent and assessment organisation is to ensure there's rigour, it's consistent across all standards. So for us internally, the actual monitoring of them assessors is going to be absolutely crucial going forward to make sure, whether you've got one in the north, one in the south, how are they making sure the grading is consistent across, not just the looking at the investment standards or the financial ones, but actually across. So that's the key part of what we're putting in place at the moment. It is an area we feel very comfortable with, because we're used to doing that for the what we call EQAs, or assessment practice across whether it's providers or employers that are delivering directly at the moment. So yeah, I think there's lots of things. As I said, every single one's different, and also the component parts are very different. So some you've got professional discussions, others you've got panels. So it's really trying to support all them different areas. One of the things I'd say has been crucial, and it's sort of lessons learned, I think, on some of the employer groups, we weren't asked to sort of join till very late on, and in some cases the assessment plans and standards had been actually agreed and finalised. So then it's been very difficult for us to sort of put our assessment hats on to say, well, actually, they're going to be really difficult to, you know, ensure there's consistency. So more and more now we are being invited very early on. And I have to say that is the way forward. I think it's that we're all joined up from day one as to, even though there's certain things in there that employers want, and it's like they come with their wish list to say, this is how we would like, this is what we want in the endpoint assessment, this is how we want it to happen, and for it to be taken forward. But we can actually go in with an assessment organisation sort of hat on to say, well, that is great, it's brilliant, but how is that going to work? And also it could be the cost implications, you know, who's going to do that. But also for us, the key one has been around the consistency, and also from one provider to another provider. You know, how can we support it in that sort of side of it as well. So, yeah, it is quite a challenge. But I have to say we are seeing sort of light at the end of the tunnel now, whereas we can sort of see exactly how that's sort of all coming together, and for actually people to be able to say. So when we produce the guidance documentation, we have sent that out to the groups and wider groups to say, does this make sense? Could you run with this? Is this going to give you the support that's needed? But also for the employers, because an awful lot has got to be, you know, a lot on the employer's part. So we need to make sure that they are aware of what is endpoint assessment, what's their involvement in it. They're going to be jointly signing it off to say that learner's ready. So, and I think it was a really good point that Joseph mentioned before, is that three-way communication between provider, employer and learner has to happen from day one or before, because that journey has to be, you know, ultimately when they get to the end and they are saying they are ready for endpoint assessment, it's not just day to day they're ready for it, but also that the employers are aware of what's involved in endpoint assessment, because they may be very competent in their day to day, but the actual preparation for endpoint assessment is going to be crucial. So certainly for our side, a lot of time and investment is being spent on training the assessors, and that is to do the simple things like make sure you put the learners at ease, make sure the employers are aware of what's going to happen on the day, it's planned, you know, all them crucial things that on the day could really tip it on its head if it's not planned and prepared properly. So I think certainly for us that's a key priority for us to make sure that that happens.
Ramsey, can I ask you a question? What about when you've got somebody who's already done part of their ILC, so would there be exemptions and things like that?
Well, I'll probably let Adele pick that up, but they would have to complete the...
So the endpoint assessment is kind of part of the reforms that we're bringing in. The endpoint assessment that you have for an apprenticeship is a new concept, because before you passed all your elements on programme on your way through and signed it off and then passed the apprenticeship as part of that, any qualifications as part of that. We've now got this endpoint assessment that the employers design, which is completely separate from the qualifications that they do on programme, and the employers design that. So things like the IOC and things like that, yes, that will be accredited to their on-programme learning and what they need to do as part of their apprenticeship, but it won't exempt them from anything in terms of the endpoint assessment. It may help with them evidencing that they can do a lot of it, but this endpoint is about demonstrating they can do the job rather than it being, you know, it's more about that competence and skill side of it over and above the exam. So.
And normally, how long would the endpoint assessment take?
It depends on what's involved in it, and obviously we look for them to be preparing each standard. I mean, some have been very good on some of the assessment plans. It sort of gives a very detailed, this is up to month 12 on programme, then from month 12 onwards, this is where we anticipate it would take the learner to put everything together for the endpoint assessment. However, you could get somebody who's really experienced, that they're already a long way and could be prepared and have everything ready, whereas you could have somebody else that needs that, particularly the supporting around, if it's around a professional discussion. You know, for me, there's a lot of support needed and preparing them to do that. So it may be mock, you know, professional discussions, just to make sure they feel comfortable on the day to do that. So I think each journey will be different lengths, depending on the, you know, competence of that young person, or even just the confidence, and also what's involved in each individual standard. Because some, you know, some of the content that what you have to prepare for endpoint assessment is very different. Sometimes professional discussions, sometimes there's a showcase, other ones, you know, there's tests and things like that. So that length very much varies, you know, from end to end, really.
Sure. Adele, from a firm perspective, do you have thoughts on the endpoint assessment?
I think just echoing the the engagement, the endpoint assessment is just the endpoint. If there's no focus on that endpoint before the endpoint, it'll show.
Yeah.
And one of the key things for us has been to engage and promote that three-way relationship between the training provider, the apprentice and the manager. If the manager isn't engaged with apprentice activity from the beginning, isn't aware of the plan, or there is a plan, and isn't aware what's required at the endpoint assessment, then that will make it very, very difficult at the end. And we've definitely seen, in terms of performance, the managers that have been engaged from the beginning, that were lucky enough to be engaged from the beginning with their apprentice, that's definitely been reflected in output at the end.
Maybe, Tammy, you probably understand funding better than all of us. Maybe you can just explain sort of the funding bands, because every apprenticeship standard has a particular amount of money assigned to it.
Yeah, that's right. So there's, in the new world, sort of from this month onwards, there's 15 funding bands. So each apprenticeship standard and a framework, the old frameworks have been put into those funding bands, is allocated a funding band. And the top mark of that funding band, whether it's £2,000 or £27,000, is the maximum that you can pay out of your levy pot towards that apprenticeship programme, or if you're a non-levy payer, it's the maximum government will contribute. And also, so that's the sort of fundamental concept, but there's negotiations to be done. It depends on the apprentice, it depends on the training provider, it depends on the input as you as an employer, how much your apprenticeship programme will cost. So that's something that you work through with your training provider at the time, but certainly the funding bands allocated give you an indication of the maximum cost that you can get from government towards that. It may be that it costs more than that and you need to pay more into that, or it may be it costs less than that because actually what you're delivering doesn't require that full amount of funding. So you need to have those conversations, but that's the concept around funding bands. It gives you an indication of what government thinks it costs to deliver it. You may not always agree with that, but that is certainly that's the concept around it.
Yes, I think there's been many interesting conversations around the funding.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see if there's any other people. Anyone else who's got some questions? Yes, madam.
Yeah, just be great. Maybe Tammy, you can answer about upskilling existing employees. We've talked a lot about, to your point, you know, young people, the 16 to 19-year-olds, the people that you're hiring to come in. But I think in financial services, a lot of the levy payers are those small to medium clients who couldn't bring in, you know, 10, 12, 15 people for a variety of reasons, but might look to use the levy, will be high levy payers, to upskill existing employees, and just some guidance around that, the kind of quickly, like maybe the do's and don'ts, because I know you mentioned that there are some rules about what you can, when you can use it, if your role isn't fundamentally
so what we want to avoid with apprenticeships is, you know, it needs to be a quality programme and it needs to be adding value and showing progression for that individual. So, you know, there are some bad old day examples of apprenticeships for existing staff where basically we're just tick boxing what they were already doing. Now that's not an apprenticeship, that's just about assessing what someone can already do. You know, apprenticeship should be about delivering training and development to an individual and delivering competence. So what Adele said earlier is about making sure that it shows that they're either moving to a new job role, there's considerable learning required to get them to move to that point. So that's something to bear in mind. So it needs to be, you know, a step forward for that individual and they're progressing to a new job role in the organisation. But absolutely, you know, 3 million job targets, all this money in the levy pot, they're not going to be all new members of staff. It's just, that's not how it works in this world. It needs to be progression points for your existing staff as well. There are some rules around who can and can't do apprenticeship, so if they've already done something very similar at the same level, it's unlikely you're going to be able to fund that through an apprenticeship. But again, if it's something that they've done something similar or a long time ago and they still need to have that 12 months plus learning to reach the competence required for that job role, they can still move forward for that apprenticeship. So there is quite a lot more flexibility than there used to be around existing staff and prior qualifications, but certainly you need to make sure you're working carefully with your training provider and college about who's eligible and who's not. I will sort of flag that's quite important. But generally there's a lot more flexibility, and I would say it does provide you with some good onward progression routes through the business. It's a good way of having a pathway through the business actually and structuring that for staff. I don't know if you've got anything specific in mind that you're thinking of, or...
Yeah, I guess some of the Helen spoke about when she was looking at the standards, you know, some of the areas like that are in most organisations, it could be accounting, it could be HR, those sorts of things. So if someone is studying for an accounting exams, can you then say, okay, we're paying all this money into a levy, their job will fundamentally change. How can we use the levy to work?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know whether Adele wants to cover any of that, but absolutely. I don't mind.
No, absolutely. There are, aside from investment-specific apprenticeships, there are hundreds and thousands, and now a whole range of new standards and new levels that will enhance and progress career in any of, in HR, in compliance. I mentioned compliance before, or areas that traditionally wouldn't have been perceived to be appropriate for apprenticeships. There's much higher levels now, they're much more complex. And if you have the level of work to support that learning, then it's relatively easy to do. I suppose the challenge is that not all of your employees are going to progress. You can't put everyone on a progression path at the same time, because you need to have that level of activity and that evolution of work to support the learning. And you're not going to have that for everybody. So it's really important to look in detail at the work and the jobs and the daily activity, and then it should be relatively easy to match that to a standard.
Becoming a training provider is quite a substantial piece of work. There's a lot involved in being a college training provider. Any of them that are in the room will tell you that, around the sort of regulations around that. Certainly there's a register of training providers that everyone needs to be on in terms of apprenticeship delivery. You're subject to Ofsted and lots of quality controls around your delivery. But certainly that's an option if that's something that your business is looking for. And some employers deliver to their own staff as a training provider, also deliver out externally to other people's employers. But actually I would say, you don't want to send your people off to be that kind of leader, as it were, in a leadership school or whatever, a management school. Actually, the benefit of apprenticeships in management or any other field is that the fact it's contextualised to your business. So you're not just packing someone off to do a qualification at a management school. A training provider is helping you deliver an apprenticeship that is bespoke and fit for your business, so they will be developing as a leader and a manager within the context of what you need. So I suppose, that's the benefit of apprenticeships. It's on the job working, isn't it? That's the point of it, rather than it just being something that's isolated.
In a normal way, I'd like you to show your appreciation of the panellists. I think it's been a very thought-provoking hour and 10 minutes. So if you could join me in thanking the panellists.